Snap good, spot down. Walsh's kick is up, and it is no good. He missed it. Are you kidding me? The season can't end like that. He missed it left. Case on a deep drop, steps up in the pocket. He'll fire to the right side. Caught by Diggs. Stay up. Oh my God! 30, no 10, touchdown! Are you kidding me? It's a Minneapolis miracle!
Hey, welcome back to Beyond the Bar podcast. I'm Denisa Tova, your host, and today we're switching it up. We're heading straight into Minnesota Vikings territory and getting personal. So with me here is my husband, Glenn Liebman, forensic accountant by day, a total Vikings super fan, and that's an understatement, nonstop, and officially stuck in what I would call the no Viking zone out on Long Island. And he's back, he's loud, and yes, he's definitely ready. Now, joining us, a very special guest, actually coming back, the man himself, Matthew Coller. And, you know, Matt, he just is, he's like Da Vinci. He's so ahead of his time. And the man, he practically redefined sports journalism. He's the founder and a host of Purple Insider podcast, covering Minnesota Vikings, I would say, all year round. He's also an author of A Football is a Numbers Game, and we'll definitely get an update on that. So on that note, Glenn, Matt, let's go and welcome to the show.
Thank you.
I mean, I'm blown away. I am blown away by that intro. I have never been compared to Da Vinci before, but I really appreciate it. I am super glad to be back. I always love hearing from you guys after Vikings game, and you guys made your trip out to Minnesota this year. I hope you enjoyed that. So it's been really cool getting to know you. And I love the number of Vikings fans that are outside of Minnesota that follow the team through my podcast, my writing, and things like that. So an honor to be here, Denisa.
You know, such a pleasure. And yes, I mean, I loved being in Minnesota. That was my first game there. And you know what? For all the fans who are sort of a fair weather fans, they love the team, they enjoy the game, but they want to do it in style. That's the way to do it. Indoors, that stadium is amazing. Energy is great. I mean, it was thumping. It was just a great experience. So, you know, you sort of threw me off. We chatted a little bit about the difference between being a journalism and between a journalist and being a fan, and we'll continue on that note, but a little bit, I got to bring out a little bit of fan in you. And I actually want to kick it off with a question for both of you guys. What's if you were to think about a game or a play, what's one of the Vikings moments that you wish you could completely erase out of your brain, like forever?
I think this is probably a great one for Glenn to start because you've probably got quite a few judging on the history of this team.
Yeah, there is plenty of them, but one for sure stands out. He knows what I'm going to say. And it's funny because the other night we were winding down our night and I flipped on the NFL Network because I'm a nutty football fan watching NFL Network in June. And they were showing Football Life of John Randall. And of course, they're going through the 98 season. And alas, the play that we're talking about now is the missed 34-yard field goal, Gary Anderson's only field goal. If that was erased, then, you know, we probably would have a Super Bowl championship. So that has to be it for me.
Yeah, I think 38 yards, a little bit wide left in 1998 to beat the Atlanta Falcons and go to the Super Bowl. And unfortunately, it did not happen, which is a play that continues to rest in the front of the minds of Minnesota Vikings fans in amazing ways. I mean, even last year, as they were going on to win 14 games throughout that entire season, longtime fans of this team were like, yeah, well, but something always goes wrong, just like 1998. And I think at one point I probably had a meltdown and said, guys, it was like 25 years ago. Let it go. Move on. But then, of course, the Vikings melted down in the playoffs anyway. And all the fans who were scared the entire season it was going to happen turned out to be right. I'll give you a more recent field goal as far as a play. And that was Blair Walsh, who missed wide left in the playoffs after the Vikings had been forced to play before they had the beautiful dome that you guys enjoy. They were playing outside at the Minnesota Golden Gophers Stadium, and that was in January, and it was about minus 10 degrees that day, and they just needed a little chip shot field goal from, I think that was 27 yards to advance in the playoffs. And that team had gotten hot. Teddy Bridgewater was playing at a high level. And a lot of people thought that they could make a run through the playoffs if they could just get past that game, and they missed. But I was going to also mention Teddy Bridgewater too, because when I first got the job to move to Minnesota from where I grew up, which was in Buffalo, to move to Minnesota to start covering the Vikings, I was very excited to come cover Teddy Bridgewater because I thought this team is on the rise. Bridgewater is a winning quarterback, a great leader, and I think he's going to get better and better as he goes along. And the day that I moved to Minnesota to start covering the Vikings was the day that he blew out his knee shockingly in practice. I know, right? It was that day, my first day in Minnesota. I hadn't been out there yet. I was just unpacking boxes and got some texts from friends saying, didn't you just move to Minnesota today? Because he just had this catastrophic injury and then never really recovered from that. And you think about where they would have been on track with the roster and the rest of the team. They ended up making the NFC Championship in 2017 with a backup quarterback. Had they had Teddy Bridgewater on the rise, maybe they get over the hump there instead. But Denisa, what's amazing for people like Glenn, and then I have learned this over the last decade of covering the team, is that the unpredictable is always the predictable in Minnesota Vikings land. Whatever different way you can find that a quarterback would go down or a kicker would miss or whatever, the Vikings have done it, and they've done it at the worst possible time throughout their history. And yet the crazy thing, Glenn, is that they're always good enough to talk you into it, right? And we are right back there this year where it's like, hey, this roster is good enough. This team is really good enough to break your heart again, my friend.
Yeah, let's put JJ McCarthy in bubble wrap till September 8th. Please, we have to, because Matt just hit the nail on the head. 50 years following this team since I'm a little boy. And question for you, because you talk to people all around the NFL, guys who covered other teams just like you, people in the media. Would you say the Vikings are the most interesting, dramatic, story-inducing team, whether it's the highest of highs, lowest of lows, unusual to the infuriating to the ecstatic? Tell us about that.
No, I think that is right. And last year, when the Vikings playoff game got moved due to wildfires to Glendale, Arizona, instead of in
because
Los
it's
Angeles,
the Vikings.
So I walked up to Harrison Smith, who, is one of their best players and potentially a future Hall of Famer. And I walked up to him in the locker room and I said, if you had told me before the season that one team had their playoff game moved because of wildfires, I would have said it had to be us, right? And he said, oh, absolutely. Yeah, I would have known it was us. It is. There are so many things that, like we were talking about, sports tragedies that have happened to the Vikings, missed field goals, lost playoff games. But on a daily basis, it almost seems like there's something weird or bizarre going on. And I was introduced to this really quickly right off the bat. Not only did Teddy Bridgewater get hurt and have his career and the franchise altered immediately, but also that was the same year where Mike Zimmer hurt his eye and had to miss a game and then do another game as the head coach with an eye patch on. And for people who don't follow football that closely, who are listening, I mean, this must sound really funny, but it was wild. Like, I've never seen that happen before. How many head coaches have missed football games in the last decade? It might just be Mike. And then later in that season, it wasn't ever shown on TV, but there was a protester who had snuck in the building, climbed to the top of the roof of US Bank Stadium, and propelled themselves down and hung some sort of protest flag in the middle of a game. And I remember thinking, it was the last week of the season, thinking, is it like this every year? And the other reporters were like, more or less. And so we've seen just about everything from the really funny, strange stuff to the really, really unfortunate. And that's, I think, what makes the job so interesting of covering this team, is that you really, truly never know what is going to happen when you wake up that day. And it's always a roller coaster, but it's never the same twice. No 2 seasons, no 2 weeks are ever the same in doing this. And I have had, my wife has asked me, you guys know my wife, she has asked me before, like, are other teams like this? And I said, kind of, but imagine if you took like 20 of the other franchises and the weirdest stuff and all plugged it into one team. And that's kind of how this is. I think the rate in which this stuff happens is so much higher that if one of these weird things happened to a team, they would talk about it for 10 years. But in Vikings land, it's like, well, that's just one of the seasons. I mean, this is the place where a dome collapsed. How many other domes have you heard of collapsing? Zero. Like, you always got to be on your toes. You always got to be ready to go to work.
The Minnesota Vikings are the journalist jackpot, I would say, right?
Sometimes, and there also can be what drives us all to exhaustion by the end of the season, because I mean, I can remember some years where things were really, really tough to cover this team. I mean, 2021 is a good example of that, where the head coach was struggling and we all knew that he might get fired. And then we had the COVID stuff going on where there was the vaccination debate with people and the quarterback, and then he misses an important game because of it and all that sort of stuff. And there were off the field issues that were going on. So sometimes it can be a little bit like darker than people would think. There was, an issue with the running back, Dalvin Cook, off the field with a woman and some accusations of him, physically assaulting her and things like that. And so as much as I love to cover, as you know, the X's and the O's and the hardcore and how is this team going to beat that team, the NFL, it's a lot of people and it's a lot of human stories and things that happen along the way. And not all of them are great. So you kind of have to, take on that part of it too. And last year was one of the toughest moments I think I've had as a journalist, was covering the death of Kyrie Jackson, who died in a car accident just before the start of the season. And stuff like that does kind of weigh on you at times. And I thought it weighed over the entire organization throughout last year. And it can be more difficult than people would think of just, the fun parts of it are great, going into a winning locker room and asking players how it happened and all that's good. But it comes along with the other stuff that happens just by 53 people and a bunch of coaches and executives all being in the same place at the same time.
There's so much that's happening. I mean, it almost feels like you bring your work home because you breathe it. I can tell. And I'm rewinding back to when you were on the show the first time. I think it was in January 2024 or ish. And back then the reason why I called you Da Vinci is because you had so many interests and you taught yourself guitar, chess. And I'm just curious, even outside of what seems to be like just a 24-hour, it's a passion. It's not a job. What else have you been up to since then?
Yeah, not a lot, because it does take up a lot of my time. That's for sure. Those two things that you mentioned are probably my two biggest passions away from this. It's funny because my answer was almost, I need to start working on another book, but that's also under the same umbrella of football. Anyway, it is funny though, because, my wife is a broadcaster for the Minnesota Lynx WNBA team. And so I have also become, over the years with her, very, very passionate about the women's basketball world, which has been fascinating to see it kind of blow up over the last couple of years in popularity. Whereas we had been going to women's basketball games for a long time together. And I got so into it that I had to start writing about it because it's like what I do. So I found a website called herhoopstats.com where their owner let me write a weekly column for them, breaking down what I saw in the data and everything else. So I actually have to kind of get to that today at some point, break it down kind of this week in the WNBA and my opinions on some things that I see and stuff like that. So that's kind of been a little bit new. That's only happened within the last 2 years, but it's just sort of more along the same lines. And it is funny with our relationship where we're pretty much talking about sports 24/7. And I don't know how many people who cover football, their wives are as into sports as my wife is. So it's kind of like, what do we got going on tonight? Well, some people watch Netflix shows. We watch game after game after game. Tonight's the NBA finals. So that like our whole world revolves around like what sports are going on tonight and what game are we going to be at? And she'll call me after she broadcasts a game and we'll break it down. And I'm also a season ticket holder to the Lynx. So I go to the games and stuff like that. I think that's been a really cool part of it too. And, I'm screwing around, making some music and trying to be a better chess player and things like that. But those are kind of just little hobbies on the side. Most of my life really is doing this. And then as soon as I'm done with this, I'm playing golf like yesterday with 3 other reporters. And guess what we're talking about? Football and the Minnesota Vikings. So, as I think people who listen to my show, like Glenn, can kind of tell that that this is really the main focus, and that I really love it. And that's what has kind of pushed me through the hours and stuff. I never consider them work hours. I was like, oh, I got to punch a clock or something, because I just get to screw around and do what I want to do, which is talk about football all the time.
Amazing.
I'm amazed. It's really cool that you do it on your own too, because I grew up in the, for anybody listening, East Coast people, Mike and the Mad Dog on radio in New York City were huge for 20 years. And I remember that, but it was 2 guys talking back and forth, and they'd have their callers calling in. You do it frequently on your own, sometimes just voicing your thoughts and opinions and, taking some questions and stuff. But how is that, doing it on your own? How is it different having a guest versus on your own and handling it all by yourself?
Yeah, one thing I really like about when I do it solo is usually I do it live on YouTube, which means that fans jump in the comments and ask questions. And there is, sort of a joke in media of like, never read the comment section. But I find it to be a lot different than that. There, like yourself, there's so many knowledgeable fans out there who don't get that many opportunities to chat with somebody who's actually in the locker room and going to the owners' meetings and the combine and sitting down with Kevin O'Connell for stories, the head coach for stories and stuff like that, that usually those people aren't that accessible. So I've tried to build my model around being the accessible journalist, the man of the people, if you will. And I like that. And it's funny about when you listen to it, it is a solo show, but yet with all the people jumping in and asking questions, it feels like there's a room full of people having a conversation. And I think it's when I read their comments, you sort of in your brain, like, oh, that's another person talking. I'm just not hearing their voice. And so when I've listened back to even my shows, I'm like, yeah, it really does sound like a community conversation about the Vikings. And that's why I've tried over the last maybe 2 years to get a little bit more into that and not just always having guests every single episode. And when it's a guest, I try to make it very conversational, give my opinions, get their responses. So it's not just a Q&A. It's kind of like this. It's like a casual conversation, but we dive deep into football stuff. And I like that I can provide the audience with a lot of different stuff. But people have asked, like, how do you spend 2 hours just sitting there talking to yourself? And that really comes from a lot of hours doing it, because I came up in the sports radio world and we used to have a 4-hour show every single day. And that requires figuring out how to talk a lot. And I also think that since I think about it so much, and since I talk to other people about it, and I spend so much time researching it and reading about it and reading opinions and analysis and looking at numbers, that it's all kind of right there. Like if you ask me whatever player's cap hit is for this year, or what's their contract or something, or what's their height and weight, or I'll just know all of it, because it's all that I really do. And if I kind of tried to, I'm just going to work these 4 hours or these 2 hours on this, it wouldn't stick the way that it does. When you really have a joy for something, it's just right there on the tip of your tongue, which makes it very easy to answer those questions and have a fun conversation and so forth.
And a lot of Dr. Pepper, right?
I do. Yes. Yeah. And I'm still looking for Dr. Pepper to jump in as a sponsor to the show at some point here. It is true that it does take I'm not a coffee drinker. I just don't like the taste of coffee, but it does take a fair amount of caffeine to be energetic for a couple hours in a row in front of the camera.
I just popped one.
Yeah.
To you.
It's the best. Right. It's the best. I got a Diet Coke with me too, because it was on sale. So I will only have brand loyalty once I get that sponsorship. I'm just saying.
Yeah, just saying. Let's say that again. Okay. Any Dr. Pepper sponsors out there, make sure. Yeah, Dr. Pepper. Dr. Pepper's the best. You know what, Matt, I can't help it, but I don't want to sort of glaze over that. Your book, Football is a Numbers Game, and I was curious too. And those of you who haven't read it, it's such an awesome.
My copy.
Yeah, there
Go
you
out and
go.
get it.
It's like a smart, nerdy. I think it's totally addictive. But
Football
what's really,
nerds, not just Vikings fans.
yes,
Anybody who's into football, period. And if you're into the trend
exactly.
data, that's it. Love
Yeah,
it.
and you know what? I was curious about that. So essentially, in a nutshell, and please correct me if I do the recap wrong, but it's almost like a behind the scenes story of a guy in a basement in the UK, basically scribbling handwritten note sheets. They're like stat sheets basically in his basement. And now it's almost like, and now NFL teams, they literally calling plays based on the data, with data changing and evolving every single day. If you were to update the book, even if, what would you add?
No, I think that's a good recap, is that a guy in the UK in the 80s started watching every football game he could get his hands on and writing down everything that happened. And then he built that into a data company that now works with all 32 teams and is influential in the game planning process, the decisions from the front office about rosters. Every single thing that NFL teams do is influenced by this company, Pro Football Focus, that he started in his back spare bedroom or something in the 80s, just because he was really passionate and enjoyed the getting the numbers, and he thought there was a different layer to football that maybe we weren't seeing with traditional statistics. And he was also a business person and created a real business plan and made it work. I think so. The book came out in 2023, at the very beginning of 2023. And one of the things that I talked about in there was a revolution of analytics being used in football. We always thought of football as too many moving parts to really capture with too many numbers. And the traditional stats kind of told the story. And then it was the football guys who could tell us what was really happening or not if they didn't want to. And this really changed the game because it gave us so many more windows into what was actually happening out on the field, as opposed to just, hey, they won or they lost. You'd hear defense wins championships and like, okay, that makes sense, and that kind of thing. But now we can get down to the finest detail of, and Glenn certainly knows this, how's the left guard doing? And that was something that we really had no way of evaluating before. And is the play caller doing his job? How are players being used? Where are wide receivers lining up? There's just so many details to every single position that this has shined a light on. But the thing that's happened since I released the book, I wrote about something called the Big Data Bowl, which is where there's a bunch of analytics people who do studies based on data that they're given. It's a competition. And then they do presentations in front of a bunch of people in the NFL. And then they're awarded, first, second, third prize for who did the best analysis with the data that they were given. And that has become a place where NFL teams go to hire people to work in their front offices. And so even from the book, one of the people that I wrote about is working now in the Carolina Panthers front office, since he was just part of a data team at Pro Football Focus. And there have been dozens and dozens of other people that have been brought into these NFL teams to study this data to try to get any possible edge. And football behind the scenes has always been a data-driven type of game. And they used to have to do it by somebody writing down, like a quality control coach, they would call them, just writing down everything that happened and then putting it in a spreadsheet and adding it up. And so what this company did was allowed them to do that much faster and to have that data on their hands. But now once you have all this data, you have to study it. You have to figure out what it means. I mean, this goes for anything. If you were trying to figure out something in the environment and you went out and you gathered a bunch of data, you would have to bring it back and then decide what it's telling you. You can't just look at it and say, well, we've got these numbers, but like, how do we use them? Football coaches don't know that, and owners of teams don't know that, but they certainly know there are people who do. And that's the math people who can figure this stuff out. So what we've seen is really an explosion of analytics departments going from maybe one person who doubled as an IT person for a team to now whole groups of people that are growing at all times. And it's catching up to where baseball was. Baseball, I don't know what the number is now, that the New York Yankees, I think, had 20 people working on their data at one point. They may have even more now. Well, NFL teams still have probably 2 or 3. But I think that's going to continue to grow the more and more, because football is all about getting the tiniest little advantage. It's one play here or there. And you mentioned the data influencing plays. Well, the cover of the book is a Super Bowl winning catch that was influenced by the Pro Football Focus data. A coach found a look that they could run against a certain defense, just sort of buried in the numbers, and said, why don't we try this? Why don't we put this play in? And that was actually one of the things that kind of inspired the book. So it's really behind the scenes. It's really changing. And yet what's so great about football is that I think with some other sports, they've changed so much that it can be almost unrecognizable at times. Like, Glenn, you and I remember where people used to hit ground balls to the shortstop and they would make a double play. And now, I mean, it's home run or strikeout all the time. And I just, I miss that. But with football, what you see, the product is fundamentally the same. It's just that the two teams are now so much more prepared for each other than they've ever been, that the chess match has risen a level. Instead of just, hey, we play our game, you play your game, and then we'll do a few tweaks and changes. Now everything is a deep dive into every situation, every player who's on the field, and how can you take advantage of just that one little thing to get an edge. So it's still the game we love, and yet it's also more exciting kind of behind the scenes in that game planning process.
And you are not a deep fake, right? You're real.
As far as I know, but I will say, though, that is another thing that is the next layer is the AI. And Amazon, what they invented for their broadcasts, because they're really taking it to the next level with their broadcast, they invented a thing that could identify when certain people were going to blitz based on their alignments and their motions. So, like, just for example, if you can envision a football field and your offense and defense, if, say, a linebacker was a couple of more feet up toward the line of scrimmage, he was going to be more likely to blitz and come after the quarterback as opposed to dropping back into coverage. So they invented this sort of AI machine that could identify like the chances based on where that player was on the field that they were going to blitz. Now that's really the next level. And the team who captures that and is able to use it in their game planning, because think about what you could teach a quarterback. If you can identify who's going to blitz, then you can teach a quarterback, if this guy is 1 yard up from where he usually is, he's 70% chance to blitz. Well, that helps the quarterback before the snap. And this is nothing like football used to be. And yet again, once again, it's still the defense is going to have stuff like that too, with the offense's alignments and the quarterback's tendencies. And so we're just continuing to make it a deeper and richer game without having like some cartoonish, they just throw 50-yard bombs or something like NBA teams shooting 73 pointers a game. So that's kind of what I love about it.
Hopefully AI can identify when a defender turns a quarterback's head around and actually catches it for a flag. Maybe that will happen.
I do think that we could do a lot better job with instant replay. That's for sure. You're referring to the Thursday night football game where Sam Darnold nearly got his head ripped off and it was not flagged, ruining the Vikings' chance at a comeback there. But you even see there, I know you're kidding, but there are advances in this that the UFL, which is a side league that kind of is, they call it a spring league. That's for players that are trying to get into the NFL that are not in college anymore. And they advanced the replay to where they were showing us on TV what the replay official was talking about. And they were showing that entire like communication with the referees and taking you inside of it, which was so much more interesting than all just standing around and waiting as Al Michaels kind of filibusters. And then they finally tell us 8 minutes later whether a foot was inbounds or not. And that's allowed them to be very transparent and I think do a better job. So they're always trying to push the game forward, I think, in every facet. But that's one where I would really like to see the NFL get a lot better is with the refereeing and stuff like that. Maybe there will be someday. There are bots that are calling balls and strikes in the minor leagues. Maybe we'll get bots calling holding someday. I don't know.
Oh my gosh. You know what? I know Glenn and I were talking yesterday about your, I don't know if you call it photographic memory. I mean, Glenn, you've experienced that.
With all humility, you have to talk about that because I was listening to you and Alex Lewis from The Athletic. You had him as a guest, and you were talking about Jalen Naylor, how he's been progressing and that this is a big year for him, and that last year he progressed a lot, but he did have his ups and downs. And Alex was recounting, some highs, and then he said, and then there was a game where he was about to go in for a touchdown, and the game teams escaped, and you said Tennessee. Just really quick. And I was struggling to remember it too. And I was like, oh yeah. How do you just the way lightning quick, you just kind of, as he was trying to process and think about it. So you have to have some kind of photographic memory or something going on there.
Well, there's a little bit of that. Yeah. I mean, I have had, well, there used to be a reporter that worked with us who really enjoyed talking about old games and stuff like that. And he would grill me on certain games and say, like, do you remember who did this, or what was the stat line for this player on any, and pretty much any game that I've ever covered, I can get really close on almost any stat line, remember key plays, who penalties were called on big moments and things like that. And you could call it a photographic memory, but I think that the way that your brain works, what gets seared into your memory is stuff that you care about the most. Because if you asked me about some class that I took in college and how you deal with some accounting problem when I took accounting too, I would have no idea because I did not care. But if you asked me who had an interception in week 2 or 3 of, let's say week 3 of 2016, Giants and Vikings on Monday Night Football, I would tell you it was Xavier Rhodes, which did happen. Just to pick out a random one, like all these that, because I was there and it was an exciting moment and it was a game I cared about. And with every single game, I don't just cover the game and then go talk to people and then write my article. I rewatch every game at least twice on the coach's film, which luckily we have access to. And that's been a total game changer for how we can cover the NFL, because we can rewatch moments from the high view and see everything that happened and then go back to the coach and say, hey, what was this? What happened there? And learn from them about different things. So I'll watch that at least twice. I look at all the data from the game from Pro Football Focus for an entire week, building up, trying to understand what happened. I'll write about it. And every game gets, at least a post-game podcast, but then the Monday night recap where we talk about it again. So when you've done all of that just based on one football game, it tends to stick in there. Someone will have to double check me on that Vikings Giants 2016 Xavier Rhodes interception. But I mean, just as an example, like if you've looked at it so many times and you talk to the guys about the plays and stuff like that, there are things that I don't remember from certain games, especially ones that were very bad. Like, if you ask me about the time that David Blau started for the Lions against the Vikings, I'd be like, I don't know how much attention I was paying as the Vikings blew them out that day. But for the most part, I think that's what it really is. And anybody who has passion about anything, like if you asked a musician, let's say you love rock and roll and you're a musician and you ask them like, hey, what was that AC/DC song? They would know it because that's what they do all the time. I saw this video on Twitter where Jack White, the great musician Jack White, I had the honor of seeing him here in Minnesota recently play live. Unbelievable that he can hear 1 second of any Beatles song and know what the song is. And so they were playing like 1 or 2 seconds of a Beatles song. And he's like, that's that song, because it's all he does all the time. And it's what he loves. And I think the same thing kind of goes for me. And that's why all that stuff is on the tip of the tongue.
Awesome. So Denise asked before the most forgettable Vikings play. I want to take us back to one of the most iconic plays. Odell Beckham, all due respect, but the Justin Jefferson catch. Can you I believe you were at that game, right? You were in the stadium. So can you take us into the press box and also the stadium? Because Buffalo had sewed that game up and it was like a prayer. So I'm curious, you're not a fan, right? You're a reporter, but you're a fan of the game and you just witnessed the greatest catch ever. So I'm curious, what were the other reporters? What was the press box like? And when you looked around the stadium, I don't know if it's open air there, but were Buffalo fans pissed? Were they, I don't believe what I just saw? Take us in the press box and in the stadium at large. I really want to know what that felt like.
Yeah, so it's interesting. I mean, in that game, it was a classic kind of Buffalo weather day where it was gray and there were snowflakes, and the Bills got off to a lead there and Cousins was struggling. And it felt like, because those two teams were both Super Bowl competing teams at that time, and for about half of the game, it felt like, okay, one of these teams is a real team and the other team is, kind of remember they won all those close games throughout the beginning of the season. The other team's kind of fake, and that they were being exposed there in Buffalo. And the other thing is that normally Vikings fans travel a lot. Like you guys came to a Vikings game. You see, if you go to LA, they take up half the stadium. Weirdly, we were in like Cincinnati and Nick Mullins is starting the game 2 years ago, and yet half the stadium is purple. Like this franchise has fans all over the place because of all the years from generations, whether it was the old purple people eaters that people picked up on, or Randy Moss or Adrian Peterson. Like they've had these great teams, and so they have fans absolutely everywhere. But the only place that I couldn't find too many Vikings fans was Buffalo, because it's not easy to get to. The weather is pretty bad, and those fans don't sell their tickets. They're going to a game like that. And I do remember the shock of it, but what's weird about that stadium is normally we're somewhere in the realm of the 50-yard line in the press box. Press boxes are fairly big, but you're usually between the 40s. And where I am in Minnesota, I'm a little bit more toward maybe the 25, 30-yard line, but that's about as far as you usually go down. Where from Buffalo, you're in the end zone. So you're looking out from a completely different angle. And when that ball went up, we're pretty far away from that. And he jumps up and he goes down. And I think I probably just looked down to say something like, well, that's the end of the game. And I did not realize that he caught it. So we kind of reacted with the rest of the world where we see the referee going like making the motion for he's catch the ball. Like, wait a minute, what? How is that possible? And then you see the replay because there's TVs inside the press box. You see the TV. And I think what probably happened in the press box, I don't remember exactly the reaction there, was everyone saying the same thing at the same time, which is, wait, what? He caught it? How did that even happen? And so every person in that press box is staring at the TV inside the press box, like looking and squinting and like, where, how is it? So, and do they have to review it? Is it really going to, and I'm sure that they reviewed it. Is it really going to be a catch and all that? And then the moment you realize, no, his hand is actually underneath that football. And that's really a catch. Wow. It was incredible, but you probably had a better view of it on TV than I had there. The one I had the great view of was the Minneapolis Miracle, where I could see the coverage and I could see that there was only one safety back. And so as I was following the ball and my eyes went to that player, I was like, wait, there's nobody back there. And so some things from the press box you could see way better than the public can see on TV, because you could see everything that the defense is doing and you can watch the full travel of the football. You could see what the quarterback was looking at. I've often said that I can't really judge a quarterback truly until I see him in person, because you can see how they command the team during, the breaks and the huddle and all that sort of stuff. That's a little harder to pick up on TV. But that one, I remember it being so far away from us where we were in the press box that we couldn't really tell. And we definitely could not tell what happened when not too long after that, Kirk Cousins did not convert a fourth down, and then Josh Allen fumbled. Eric Hendricks picks it up. And all they needed was just that one little kneel down. So there's in that environment, it was insane just to see like the crowd going quiet. There is something that never happens. There's a few places that have environments that are beyond belief. I think one of them is US Bank Stadium, but the Superdome, Seattle was really amazing last year to see, and Buffalo was definitely one of them. And that game, but what I did see though in that same game, Patrick Peterson intercepted 2 passes in the end zone to help win that game. And Duke Shelley had a pass breakup on another play that was to the end zone. Those were right in front of us, which I've never had that view before. And I'm sure in their new football stadium that they're going to build in Buffalo, they'll change this. But I was almost right on top of where Patrick Peterson intercepted that pass. So what I could see was Peterson reading the route and jumping in front of it, and Josh Allen not seeing him and throw the interception. So some things, because we're there and we're in our spot, we get a great view of, and we can kind of go into detail. And other times we got to go look and we got to go call up the highlight and look at it 3-4 times to even figure out what happened. But that was, I think if you're talking about the best games I've ever covered, the Minneapolis Miracle game in 2017 is undefeatable. But then right after that is that Buffalo game for sure.
Wow. That you're such an amazing storyteller, as someone who, I don't understand the technical aspect of the game. But I love the human aspect of it. And Glenn and I talk about it all the time. I said, if they're not doing so well, I said, they're not assets. You know, they're human beings and they can be great performers and typically, but it's that tremendous pressure of, you know, it's the weather elements, you know, if they're away and the fans and just what goes on in your mind. So yeah, I just get drawn into it, and this is really fascinating. You know, you're gonna have to continue and pop back in every so often. But you know, we have a little lightning round here, and I'm gonna kick off the first question. Who would you say is the most underappreciated Viking of all time?
Ooh, all time is pretty tough. So I will say, I'll do this from a national perspective because I think locally Vikings fans, and Glenn knows this about Vikings fans, they know everybody and everything about the team. And you know, so it's hard to find one that Vikings fans don't appreciate. I think I'd probably pick a guy that I've had the privilege to cover over the last almost decade now, which is Harrison Smith. Because Harrison Smith is a Hall of Fame worthy player. If you look at all the underlying data, if you look at his PFF grades, which can be a little controversial at times because they're trying to grade every play, but he really stands out among those. But where he plays on the field doesn't always get the most shine. If you're in the right spot and they don't throw the ball at you, you did a great job, but nobody knows it except for your coaches, and things like that can go under the radar. He is the most hardworking player on the game, most passionate player, highly, highly intelligent, and sort of leads in a quiet way, which doesn't get as much attention. And a lot of his greatest plays can just be something as simple as, you know, a blitz off the edge that he decided he was going to do on his own, but nobody knows that except for the coaches. So the coaches will be amazed that he identified something the other team was doing based on his study and then made a play that from the outside world, you might just say, oh, well, you know, that's a good play, Harrison Smith. But the coaches are like, that was all him. He figured that all out on the field himself. And then how much everyone else looks to him. So not only has he made the great plays throughout his career, but there's so much more layers under the surface, which, you know, I really like that kind of player to dig into what makes this guy really great, where people in the locker room respect him the way that they do. I don't know if he'll get into the Hall of Fame, but I think that that's what makes football so fascinating, is peeling back on that. Like, the people who really play and coach this game are in sheer amazement of this player. Why is that? And I have been lucky to follow him along in this, you know, journey and see him even grow as a player and a leader and things like that. But he's one of the most interesting players I think I've ever covered, and probably does not get the shine outside of Minnesota that he deserves. Who do you think, Glenn?
Ooh, that's a great question. I have to answer quick. I would say Jake Reed, because Jake Reed was before Randy Moss got to Minnesota. He played second fiddle. He was kind of like the Jordan Addison to to Justin Jefferson that he was to Chris Carter. But he was great 1,000-yard seasons. You'd know better than me if he had 2 or 3 of them. And he was really on an upward arc. And then we draft Randy Moss because at that point in the draft, you had to draft him. And he had to take a step back. And I think he did it with grace, and he still filled a great role. So I just think class act. Great performer when he was in a lead role, great performer when he was in a supporting role, and just a great teammate. And I see him from now time to time. I'm not a huge social media guy. Denisa knows that, but I'm on Twitter and watching, and he shows up, and he I don't know if you ever come across him. He still shows up in videos. I saw him on some stuff when the team was in London last year, and he was there supporting the team. I was like, that's really cool. You know, I don't know what he's up to, and he didn't make a ton of money in his career, and he's over there in London. That's really cool. So I want to say him.
Yeah, and Jake is one of the nicest guys you'll run into. I believe it was 4,000-yard seasons for him. So you're right. He was an elite receiver and took a backseat when they brought in Randy Moss, and it helped them become, at that time, the best offense that had ever played in NFL history. But if he had been upset, as we see many receivers are from time to time, if he had demanded a trade and that kind of thing, they would not have become what they were, and they would not have been on the doorstep probably of going to a Super Bowl at that point without Jake Reed. I love that answer because if you asked anybody outside of Minnesota, hey, name me like the top 3 or 4 Vikings wide receivers, and no one's even getting to Jake Reed, but all Minnesota Vikings fans, I think, have a unique understanding and appreciation for how great he really was.
Yep. Agreed. Next question. Current players. We're going to make it a little simpler so you don't know. What Viking would you want next to you if you were in a bar fight?
Oh, a bar fight. Oh, gosh.
Not that you get into a bar fight, but let's say a bar fight's going on and you need somebody next to you kind of to, be next to.
Oh, for sure. Yeah. I mean, I had the easiest answer for a long time, which would have been Danielle Hunter.
Yes.
There's nobody's getting into a bar fight with Danielle Hunter on your side. The most jacked player I've ever seen in my entire life. I think right now this answer might be a little different than you might expect. I would go with a guy by the name of Ivan Pace Jr., who is only about 5'8", maybe 5'9", and he's a linebacker. But if you are able to be a 5'8" or 5'9" linebacker in the NFL, like think about that. Think about people in your life who are 5'8". You're like, that short guy over there. This guy is an NFL linebacker, which is not playing a million miles from the ball. That's playing right up with the 6'4", 320-pound offensive lineman. And yet he is like a Wolverine. He will go attack these offensive linemen, slam into them, stop them in their tracks. He's one of the best blitzers in the league. He's one of the best run stoppers in the league. And I think it's because he's insane. And I mean that as a big compliment. Like, he is willing to do things to his body that no one else is willing to do. He is willing to bounce off of people and be aggressive. And I just think if you got in a fight with him, it would be really, really hard to first of all, he's never going to stop because he's so relentless, but he's also so quick. And he's just got a spirit to him that it only belongs to NFL linebackers. They are a unique breed. And he is a guy that you would just not want to be on the wrong side of, for sure.
I thought you might say Ryan Kelly, because when I saw this gentleman in his first press conference and heard his voice, which is quite deep, and the size of him, I said, I don't think he's going to get bench pressed by Dexter Lawrence much here. So I'm happy to have him on the team.
No, I agree with you. The thing is, it depends on what kind of fight we're talking. So you said bar fight, and that would be to me.
Gotcha.
I think in a bar fight, you want the craziest person on your side, because that's like a no holds bar. Like, just anything counts. You can smash a beer bottle and stab somebody with it. But when you're talking about, if it was like a tactical fight of some kind, I would want Ryan Kelly, because what people don't know about those offensive linemen is that they usually have to be some of the smartest people on the team, if not the smartest. There are so many different details to understand, and they are great learners and great tacticians. So you're right that, like, he has a presence to him where it's a little bit of like, don't mess with me. And I think that is necessary for an offensive line. They didn't always have at that position, but I think if you were like in a MMA style fight where you got to prepare and study your opponent and all those things, and then you also had to have the toughness element, you would want an offensive lineman on your side. The other thing is too, that if you were in a trash talking contest, you want offensive linemen. They will win every single time because they talk so much trash and they're smarter than most players. They could take it to a different level than most of the other positions.
One last question. Denisa will be interested in this because we both work out. We're kind of fit. Not crazy like we used to be, but you mentioned Danielle being jacked. You just came out of minicamp OTAs. Who currently is the most jacked Viking right now?
Well, I think that there were two that really stood out, and it is a funny thing. Like, we go out there and we kind of look at them all and we're like, oh, looks like this guy's been working out. It's just a silly, like, it doesn't really, they should be, they're in the NFL, but a lot of times players come out of college and they think they're in shape, and then they play an NFL season and go, oh, I was nowhere close to where I actually needed to be, because this is the pros. This is 24/7. It is your job to be an NFL player. And Dallas Turner, who was a first-round draft pick, took a huge step forward just in that department as somebody who was, he just wasn't ready, I think, physically for the NFL, even though I didn't think he had a bad first season by rookie standards. But that's something that the guys have to learn. And usually what people don't know is that through a season, a lot of players lose weight during the season because they just don't have the same opportunity to work out all the time. And you're putting so much strain on your body every Sunday. You get banged up, you don't want to lift and that kind of thing. So there's this huge behind the scenes recovery type of process to get back to where you can lift and keep the weight and the muscle on, because otherwise you lose it. And the offensive linemen also have to do ungodly things with food sometimes. And then there are other guys who are just naturally huge and don't have to do anything different. It's really unique with that. But Dallas was the one where I think if you're looking for like a next level for a player to take, you could see that he took it seriously. And that's really what you're looking for, is not to try to say, wow, he's not, or he's in better shape, so he's going to be great. But what tells you is that he cares. He cared enough to go into the offseason and say, all right, I have to be a lot bigger next year if I'm going to actually be better.
Yeah. You know what, Glenn? You and I often talk about you being a GM. What would you do? I'm curious. What would be like an impulsive decision that you would make as a new GM?
That I would make?
Yeah, yeah.
Oh boy. That's a good question. She asked great questions. What would I do? I'd accumulate comp picks. That's for Matt. Comp picks. That's what we no. I would try to find a good balance between drafting well and getting younger, but also bringing in talent and understanding. Not a lot different than the course that they've gone, and which is a unique course, the team right now, totally different than, I don't know, maybe I've ever seen in the history of the team. And that's find the young quarterback on the rookie contract. And you didn't need to do this, of course, right, Matt, 30 years ago before the salary cap and all that. But in the last 20 years or so, get this rookie contract so that you can build talent around him, and this understanding that it's the team that you need to build an entire team with a lot of depth. And that's kind of what they've done. So I like what they're doing, probably a lot of what they're doing right now.
Well, that's the interesting thing, Glenn, is that, during the previous era, a lot of times we were critical because they were not crafty with the way that they spent their money. They put so much into overrating their own players in a lot of ways, and then so much into one player, their quarterback, who wasn't good enough to get them over the top, and it felt like they were stuck in purgatory. And I think, Denisa, this is the most interesting thing that has developed over the last few years, with fans like Glenn really thinking from a GM seat. And this is what I love about my show and the types of fans that are attracted to my show, because I like to do that. And so I love that we can have these conversations that are sort of high level front office thinking about windows to win and team building and stuff like that. And part of that's just because there's more information out there than ever for all of us to understand team salaries and when players peak and stuff like that, to how a team should be built. And so for years, I was kind of talking about what you were just talking about, like this kind of salary cap hack that they needed to take advantage of. And now that they've done it, I'm like, okay, what else should I say they should do? Sometimes I find myself thinking, like, am I just praising them too much? Or is this them just doing exactly what everybody thought that they should, which is what you're saying. And that's why just in general this year, and you mentioned it being unique, I have felt a buzz from Vikings fans this year more than I think any other year. And it's reflective on my podcast numbers and stuff like that. Normally in the middle of June, fans would be thinking, okay, I'm going to focus on the Minnesota Twins baseball or the Minnesota Lynx in basketball. And it's still like Vikings fans are still thinking so much about this team and what it could be. And I think that they have taken the right path with their general manager. And so analytical guys like Glenn and myself, well, that's who the Vikings have running their team. And so they're doing a lot of the things that we had been talking about that had been studied and are succeeding. And sometimes I think, like, am I running the team, or is it just finally those data studies and stuff having someone who understood them? And now we're seeing those decisions come to fruition.
Yeah, no, that's really interesting. People like you, analytical, plus the accessibility to data. I mean, this is going to be so fascinating where this leads. And, a friend of yours who I also had on a podcast talking about the world of statistics. I mean, it's just opening up new career fields. It's really, 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 truly fascinating. And speaking about your podcast, Matt, I have a lot of respect for it. And it's sort of this conduit. It's almost like it humanizes, you providing sort of access to what's happening behind the scenes, and you're humanizing the aspect of it. So I think, and your storytelling, it's just fabulous. So on that note, how can you tell audience how they can support Purple Insider?
I will, but I have a question for you, Denise. I want to ask you
Yes.
first before we
Okay.
run. What's it like for you watching Glenn go through all the things that the Vikings put this man through? I mean, I just
Well,
sometimes I think,
Not emotional at all.
how do these fans do it? I mean, so many times there's a line in The Office. I've been rewatching The Office a lot, where Michael Scott says, "I'm ready to be hurt again," and I think that is every Vikings fan every year. So, what is it like watching him with that roller coaster that is the Minnesota Vikings?
you know what? It is it is an interesting experience. And Um,
Kind.
there are times when I tell our 3-year-old puppy we're going out for a walk because the stuff's about to get ugly. And he, I really feel at first when we started dating, he was telling me how much of a fan he is, and I thought, yeah, well, again, I get it, I understand it, and I truly didn't understand it. And then he was trying to explain to me that Vikings were probably doomed, that it's just been, there's no way, and it almost appeared to be skeptical. So I have now experienced the games where they sort of take it to a certain level, and it's almost there. And I started feeling it in my gut, and then something happens. And so we saw him on the floor. We, just sort of lamenting. And I now prepare myself to just sort of the range of emotions, and he just lives it. And it will determine what the day is going to look like, and the following morning. But we've had numerous discussions about, wait a second, today you're excited about that individual and these guys. Just remember they're human beings. So when they screw up, or if they screw up, just keep remembering that. But yeah, I've seen it all. Well, what about you, Matt? I mean, when you guys are watching games together, but is there a moment when when your wife goes, "Oh my God, there he goes again"?
I think she gets tired of me talking through so much probably during games, because I mean, we watch together mostly since I'm covering football and I'm in the stadium. And during games in the stadium, I'm just looking at my laptop and watching what's happening. So there's no real thing going on other than me talking to the two reporters next to me, and oftentimes trying to figure things out, like what happened and who did what and that kind of stuff. But when I'm watching games with my wife, a lot of times it's basketball, and I really like to watch basketball coaches and how they manage their matchups and offenses and defenses and timeouts and all those things. And I think what happens is I will annoy her with talking about every single possession back and forth, like, oh, they just switched this matchup, and did you see they did this, and I remember when I said that, and that kind of thing. So I think where we started this was talking about how I talk for 2 hours in a row. It's like, well, you should see me at home when I'm just watching a basketball game with my wife, how much talking I'm doing. So yeah, I mean, I like to this is why I do this, because I like to just get into every single detail of whatever sport it might be and study it and try to understand it, and that kind of thing. And so no matter what I'm watching, I'm probably doing that. And there's a reporter who sat next to me for the entire time that I've covered the team. And that's kind of during those games. Did you see that? And, oh, they're doing this. And, oh, I saw them do this on tape, or the numbers said this, that kind of thing. That's what it's like listening to me on the podcast, is pretty much what it's like watching a game with me.
You know what? When Glenn first told me about you and your podcast, this was a while back. It's a game changer. He sort of feels stranded out on Long Island, and he's been such a deep fan, and it's I think it's sentimental for him as well. He started watching games with his dad, and I feel bad. So when you surfaced, I'm like, I have to connect you guys. There has to be a way to do that. And it's a real thing. I didn't get it a few years ago. Why all this emotion? It's just a game. But, I spent some time in Denver, and the Denver Broncos fans, I mean, they get into it too. And when I look around the stadium at first, I would see families with little kids, generations, holding on to season tickets. And I realized it just sort of brings people together, and it's also memories. And so I really get it. Although he goes a little, he's a bit much sometimes. Yes, he definitely is. But I get it. I get it.
Yeah, and honestly, that's the best part, I think, of football in general, is that there's so many stories to tell, and every person has their own story, whether it's, I'm in the locker room talking to a player about how they got to the NFL, or if it's two fans in the stands, they have a backstory for themselves for how they got there, what it means to them. I've done a couple of stories throughout the years with different fans. Like I did one about fans traveling last year, and I talked to a guy who lived in California, and him and his son every year they would try to visit a new stadium where the Vikings were playing. And so they would fly, and it means so much to everybody that it's not just a win or a loss. It's so much more than that. And every single thing that goes wrong for the Vikings, it is like a little bit of a badge of honor, because you remember where you were, how you felt. This time I thought it was the real thing, or who you were watching with. And all of that just means so much to people and makes it really special.
And you make it a lot of fun, man. Your podcast, what you said earlier on this podcast about how you don't feel alone. You feel like when you're on there just doing your thing and you're answering questions. I'm sure I speak for everybody, all your listeners, that like you feel like it's a conversation. So what Denise is saying, it's not like Jet fans around here or Giant fans in New York or wherever other people are around the country, where they're in the home team. I don't have anyone to talk about it really with, but I feel like I do when you're talking about it, because I probably even talk out loud when I'm on the treadmill or when I'm out with my dog and you're saying something, I'm talking back to air, but I feel like I'm talking to you. So thank you, my friend. You bring a lot of joy and just a lot of, for something that's really important to me. You make it just great on a daily basis. So I'm very appreciative.
Well, and I really appreciate you and all the support from both of you guys. It means the world to me to have people in a lot of different places and connect you back to what's happening. And that's kind of how I view the job. And we talk about like being a fan or whatever. I think the most important thing for me is connecting people that it means so much to, like yourself, to what's happening here. Like they can't send all the fans inside the locker room. They send 10 of us to go tell the story of these teams. And it means so much to me that when you can hear me talking about it, you could be engaged with that. And it's bringing you closer to something that you truly love and care about. So I appreciate being on here so much and the support that you guys have given. And it's not just here, but even just the text here or there, like listening to you and giving a reaction to something, like it's a really great feeling that because sometimes you see download numbers and you just think like, okay, I don't know who's listening. I'm not sure. And then to put, names to faces to stories, it's just awesome. So I really appreciate both of you doing this.
Our pleasure, definitely. And please do let people know how they can support. If there's more than just listening and subscribing. Is there a program where they can participate in?
Yeah, sure. I mean, the best way you can support the show is always just by listening or reading. So if you go to purpleinsider.com, we've got the audio, video, and all of my writing that's housed over there. So you can kind of see everything. And, I had mentioned that we're always looking for sponsors and stuff like that for the show. And, any old time, Dr. Pepper, feel free to drop on in. But, we're always looking to do that. But it's become a business that I have built over the years after I used to be in sports talk radio, and it's supported by just the people that take the time on the treadmill, walking the dog and whatever else to listen to me. That's how it makes it still run. So anybody who drops in and gives it a listen is doing great support for me.
Absolutely.
Keep spreading the word.
Yes, we'll definitely be doing that. And we're going to put the the link below in the show notes. And again, thank you so much for hanging out with us today, Matt. It's been a true pleasure. And for everybody listening, make sure that you follow us on the social media as well, Beyond the Bar Podcast. And until next time, stay curious and stay inspired.